share this.
So this is on your Monty Mathur, right?
No, it should be on my Ramneek Mathur page.
I do that. Okay,
Yeah.
well, not really, but hold on a second. Let me get in there.
Hey everyone, hold on for a second. We're sharing this live on all of the pages. I think we are. It's supposed to be
here
live.
There it is. All right. I see us.
There it is. I see it.
All right. Let me share, and then we'll get going here. Okay. Were you able to share on your other pages?
I shared it on my personal, and then let me see where else I would be able to share it. Why not? You know?
I don't see a share button on mine.
I just shared it on my personal and one other group. So.
Yeah, so Monty, I'm not seeing a share button here for me at least.
Okay. No worries.
Yeah, I can share it, I guess, afterwards.
Yeah, no worries. Let's see here. How are you? First off, how are you? Let's start there.
Yeah. Well, up to like all the fluster of trying to get this up, I'm good. And so, but now that we're live, excellent.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah. So thanks for everyone that is going to join, hopefully. I just messaged Joe out of the blue, just 10 minutes ago, 15 minutes ago?
Yeah.
So, I was like, hey, Joe, do you want to go live and just talk about what we're feeling, seeing, and kind of have a conversation around, more on the mental health side of everything that we're kind of going through, all the headlines we're reading, they're depressing and sad about everything we're about to deal with or dealing with already in certain areas, health-wise. And then the other headlines you see a lot of is the economy, but no one's really talking about just the mental health aspect of what we're dealing with right now. And the first person I thought of, Joe, was you, to just, see if I could catch you online and, see if we can just chat about it. And, if people want to engage with us and ask us questions, from our experiences, like life coaches and whatnot, or just even share their own experiences, I thought it would be cool to just kind of be online and give people the opportunity to, kind of create this connection.
Love it. Yeah, absolutely. Let me turn off all my devices.
No worries.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the invitation, and I really appreciate the idea of a conversation, and it has been very interesting, very eye-opening, also has induced additional reflection for myself in all this. And so I've noticed a lot. And so I do appreciate, especially with you, man, Monty, it's really refreshing that we could just put things on the table, chat about it without any type of, make sense of it all or not.
Yeah, I mean, it was funny. We were off camera for a second, and you were telling me about being in the Costco line and having to cough, and you're like, oh shit, what's going on here?
Right.
So,
it's really interesting to see how I wouldn't even have thought about it before, and now just really conscious of what I'm doing, how I'm being, those types of things. So, yeah.
The more I thought about it, like, during this time, even for me and my work, it's kind of put a lot of things on the back burner. There's people, even though like real estate and everything else is considered essential, or whatever, but certain people are holding off. It's having an effect on all types of people that I come across. People are losing their jobs. My own business has slowed down in several different ways. And it's just, I don't know, I'm taking this moment to kind of sit back and people are pretty good at people watching, but I try to watch myself as well in that way. And I think that has been very helpful for me, especially this time around. And I'd say for maybe like the last few years to kind of practice and get into a practice of mindfulness and kind of separating myself from the thoughts that I'm having, and then separating my thoughts from the emotions that those are causing. And I don't know, I've just been in a state of reflection, like I hope a lot of other people are too, hopefully by choice, but if not, we're just in a place where we can kind of revisit what we're doing, revisit our careers, revisit our take and everything, on what we're trying to accomplish. And I don't know, I hope, and my hope is that people come out of this with more clarity in their own life. How about you, Joe?
I'm with you 100%, man. When this all broke out, having practiced mindfulness for some time now, and the idea of, observance, paying attention to what's happening inside of me and outside of me, and allowing me to really, not necessarily deconstruct, but really see what's happening necessarily on the surface, and then also what's happening underneath it all. And so
Right.
what it brought to light for me was, I'm one of those guys who really loves a good quote, or something that really resonates with me. It's like like what was said in a quote or in a statement or what have you is real resonant with me. I wish I could have written it, right? So there's an adage that is
I love those. I love those.
Right.
Yeah.
There's and there's one that's, of course, extremely popular, which is, we don't see things as they are. We see things as we are. And so so that brought to mind an analogy that I once saw from a gentleman who has since passed, but I recall him, getting on a stage, and he had an orange in his hand, and he just like smiled at the crowd, and he just squeezed the orange, and unexpectedly, and orange juice just came out. He said, "This is an orange, and when you squeeze an orange, what comes out? Orange juice."
Right.
He says, "When you're squeezed, what comes out?"
Right.
And so I thought, wow, what a great thought starter, and also a pathway and a doorway, to really have some self-inquiry in terms of, when the shit hits the fan, or where I'm uncomfortable, how do I react, and or how do I respond? Yeah. And so for me, I see things, this happening, and the funny thing, and this is a side note here real quick, but we saw it collectively, right? 2020, the year of like clear vision, that's going to be absolutely crystal clear. And then within the first 3 days, it's like, what the heck is happening?
It's never been so unclear.
Right. And so, but for me, it's like, I think the veil in a lot of areas of my life is, it's just being ripped, right? To get beyond the surface, or those things that are presented to the world, and those things that maybe, we find ourselves as our identity in front of us. Some call it mass, some call it position or status or what have you. Those things that we identify with. When that is all gone, who are we? Yeah. And so, that, and I thought, this is happening for the collective awakening. And then as I started to speak to friends, whether they be, just old acquaintances, family, close friends today, everyone's had a different perspective of what was going on and what it meant for them. Yeah. And, so that thought of like, we don't see things as they are. We see things as we are, right? Yeah. That's so powerful. Yeah. Unnecessarily as a judgment, like we're looking at it wrong, or it's not the right way to look at things. But I do believe that this is not like a 2-week ordeal where this too shall pass. And I was speaking to a friend in San Diego, and he was pretty oblivious to what was going on. I mean, just like, this, he started going back in history. This is just something that's going to bypass those. We just need to adjust. And I felt myself having a lot of angst about it.
Yeah.
I don't know why, and actually some, and then I found myself kind of projecting what I was feeling about what was happening onto him. Like, dude, you need to think about this. This is a wake up call, but you're not even, you don't hear the alarm, right? And I'm sure that's true for a lot of people. And it's not right or wrong. It's just, so for me, it was like in my good intentions to share what I believe was happening. I just made a decision for me to make an impact on those that I love and those and just the world. This reflection is for me too, for sure. So
the way you just framed that just nailed it for me, because I wrote about this in a blog post a couple of weeks ago. I felt the same exact way through different circumstances, and I came to the same thing, like, okay, there's a power in reacting, there's a power in responding, which is completely different when we're confronted with something. And then I kept feeling there was something else, and I think I named it the third door in a crisis. And I felt like reacting is the evolutionary thing we do, right? It's the most obvious. We feel something and we react to it, right? And then the next thing is the response. Like, if we can take it in, kind of, digest it a little bit, and then we can come up with a better, thoughtful way of doing something. But then there was another part of me, and I think this one was more apparent to me this time around in my life, is that I'm like, no, there's another door, and that other door to me is to initiate. I'm like, you can react, you can respond, but there's also people that can initiate during this time, that they can start something during this time. And the initiate doesn't need to be a response directly to what's happening, but it can be a catalyst to something better that's to come. And
right.
and it was just funny, because I kept getting pulled. Like 6 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, even maybe 2 years ago, my instinct would be, no, I'm better than this. I'm going to create a response. But this time around, I'm like, I'm not interested in responding to this. I want to do something. I want to create something out of this. I don't know what that means, but
right.
it was different than those other two buckets.
Yeah. So is this a part of that creation?
Kind of. I mean,
yeah.
I haven't done videos as much this year at all. A lot of people know me for different walks of life, whether I've helped them, in real estate or investments or whatnot. But I've always seen myself as someone, I want to be an advisor or a resource for people. I want people to call me if they don't feel like they know what's going on. Someone who can help them realign them with whatever their goals are, in the context of them, and I've always perceived myself in that way. And I feel like and during this time I've reflected more. I'm like, maybe I can show and try to showcase that effort that I'm trying to put into everything I do. We had one comment actually right now. Hey Lawrence, how you doing? He says, if done correctly, I think a yearly 1 or 2 week quarantine has many benefits on many different levels.
I'm feeling that.
I mean, I don't disagree with him.
Yeah, those are beautiful possibilities. The idea of creating something. I don't think things will be the same after all of this, in many different facets. So that's a great thought, Lawrence. I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean, in theory, and it's a big reckoning of how we've just been zombies somewhat, right? Just mired in the rat race and being caught up in, a lot of people use the term the matrix, and this is just a beautiful opportunity to take a step back and to reflect. So the funny thing is, I was sharing with you about my buddy in San Diego, and so he's very active, very adventurous. He's a gym rat, and so his routine is disrupted, right? Like, I can't do this,
Right.
with his set of friends. And, San Diego's like, man, this is like the night that we go out, to the club.
Right.
And this is this. And, and it's all just been like taken away. Right? And so he texted me last night. He said, this is the most boring day I've ever had,
Right.
So without trying to like get on a pedestal or like a soapbox or whatever during the last couple of weeks, I just try to ask questions. It's like, man, what a great opportunity. I know you have this business in mind down the road. You can delve in, right? Spend 2 hours just like, this is your research time. You never had time for it, right? And it's like, nope. And so what's happening, I believe, is as this continues to, expand in time, there's folks who are realizing like, this is just not going to end tomorrow.
Right.
Right. And so, it's somewhat of this forced, space of introspection, which I always believe is healthy. I mean, people do it many times at the end of the year. They take inventory of their lives and they make resolutions, but I think this is something deeper, and at the same time, I really want to be a conduit and a space where people who, like you mentioned, from a mental health perspective, trying to sort everything out. Right. And what is even my next step? People who are, like can't work.
Yeah.
Just providing for everyday necessities,
Right.
or they're down to their last toilet paper roll. I mean, it's like, wow.
I mean, it's one of those things I don't know, my brain works in so many different ways when something happens. And like, I think of so many different types of implications something has. And then I try to make sense of it in a more practical way afterward. I just let it just keep coming in. And one of the things that kept coming out to me was this aspect of, oh shoot, I did it. Oh no. One aspect I had that kept coming back to me is that, right now we're all being told that the most effective thing we can do is, stay at home, like essentially. And, the science behind it makes sense, flattening the curve and all that stuff. But what's interesting to me is what that means is, at least from my perspective, is that basically what we're doing is having to be alone in our own heads. And that's causing people to lose their shit, and nothing is more unpleasant than an untrained mind. And that's what I've come to know. And the reason is because if you don't understand or know or can differentiate in your head the differences between what you're feeling and what you're thinking and how those are different than you as a person, then essentially you feel like you're just one thing in your head. Like every emotion that happens, everything that you think is you, and it's just this wave after wave of just, random thoughts, because we're having thousands of thoughts at a time, and if we don't take this time to separate and understand and just take a step back and observe our own minds in this space, I think we're going to do ourselves a disservice, because it's very important for us to understand and separate these different aspects of how our mind works. It's the nature of how we think, and I don't know. I think there's a place for that where I hope a lot of people have the opportunity to kind of do this kind of work. I guess you could call it inner work, or something, to really understand the nature of how the mind works, and I think it's really interesting because the untrained mind is like the most unpleasant thing we can come across. And, one thing that I think about is like, even in prison, one of the most terrible things that can happen to you is solitary confinement, which is considered punishment within prison, which like that just tells you nothing is more torturous than being left alone in your own mind. Yeah. Right? Like point. So yeah. Our culture is just so, I don't know, like we're so not okay being alone. in our own head space. And I feel like, you know, just imagine if like your mind is that terrible. I mean, if your mind is terrible company like that, then just imagine it can't be a great play. You know, you can't be a great person to be around other people, right? And I don't know. It's just like I just keep thinking of all these things that happen during this time, and it's all in our heads.
How would you help to, if someone inquired, they like in the conversation with them and what you've just said, I'm totally like, I see eye to eye in that respect. In terms of a mindfulness practice, how does someone begin that journey, and what would you recommend or suggest? Because you're saying a trained mind, right?
Yeah.
You meant an untrained mind. How does one go about training their mind?
I think it's, I mean, I'm not an expert at it, you know, but there's so many different ways people approach, let's say, meditation, right? There's people that, and I don't know the technical, like the history behind, you know, the Buddhist practice and whatnot, and the Hindu practice and all these different ones where, you know, some practices focus on a tangible object first, right? And then go from there. And other people focus on their breath just to kind of start somewhere. But the best way to put it is trained awareness and intention is what mindfulness is all about. So if the more you can figure out a way to see the difference in your head, the better. So like, you know, let's see, like if something happens to you and it initiates anxiety, there's a split moment where you can catch the anxiety coming on. Like if you observe closely enough, and maybe you can have people around you say a trigger word to tell you to when they observe you coming across this emotion, right? Some emotion, just pick it. But then that allows you to like see it happen. And then when you think about it, like you can't, like for example, like if someone, you know, cuts you off on the road, and you're just so fucking angry, right? Like, oh my God, why did he do that, right? But if you think about it, like you can't stay angry that long without repeating the same story in your head over and over and over. Like if you try to stay angry with the same image in your head, the half-life of anger is very, very short, right? You just can't stay angry physically that long. So that kind of shows you that like, okay, emotion is different than thought, you know, and just because I thought something and I'm feeling an emotion, I can just let it flow and feel through it, but then not attach to it in any way. So then then you kind of understand how quickly you get over emotions, you know, and I think that's the first step. And the more you do that, and that's what I mean by the trained mind, it's like a muscle. Like the more you do that, the more secondhand it becomes, you know, at least for me.
You know, yeah, and what I'll share, and not advocating any type of form of meditation or what have you. I mean, people have different associations to that. Some may, you know, attach it to a spiritual realm, and some just the idea of a trained mind.
Yeah.
And it's okay. You can, you know, anyone can decide the intention of why they want to explore meditation.
Sure.
I know for myself, I learned from someone who I took a year-long course in. It was actually a parenting course of all things.
Oh, really?
That's but cool. Yeah, and I learned about meditation where you do focus on breath. And
on breath, okay, yeah.
Yeah, and the reason that really has stuck with me, because I've tried different modalities of meditation, is because as it was explained to me, and this really struck me when it was says, you know, it was from, she's well known, Dr. Shefali Sabari is her name.
Oh,
she's,
conscious
parenting. Yeah.
Conscious parenting. Yeah. I've heard that.
Yeah.
I haven't read it, but I know that name. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then she said the only thing that stays with you from the time that you are born until the time you transition or die
Mm-hmm.
is your breath, right? And so when you focus on the breath, then you are in the present moment. And many times, what keeps us unstable is either regrets of the past or
Mm-hmm.
worries of the future.
Right.
And so, in the simplest form, she said, what you're going to do is you're going to be an observer of the thoughts so you can then begin to understand the adage that you are not your thoughts, right? Thoughts come and they go, right? And just like you mentioned, we have thousands of them
Yeah.
throughout the
Yeah.
day, right? And then we potentially suffer from those thoughts when we believe them, right? And they're false,
Right.
right? So it was super uncomfortable when I started because right away I thought I'm supposed to control my mind,
Right.
right? And so when a thought came, I'm like, oh no, I'm doing it wrong. But
Right.
because I knew I was thinking, it was like, oh, I'm seeing how this is happening. And all I do is just return to focus on the breath.
Yeah.
Little did I know that that was my training ground of mindfulness. So that when something happened in real life, right, and I was either triggered or something, I felt a reaction coming on, as I continue to just exercise that muscle over time, I didn't realize that this epiphany of one day is like, oh my gosh, I'm mindful now.
Yeah.
It's just this trained way. It was like I was going through this mental Olympics of sorts.
Right. And
So
it's
when there's,
exhausting. It's exhausting.
yes,
Yeah.
when something sets me off or is like I have a reaction to it, like I mentioned, in that moment, I can say, okay, that was meant for me. Someone did not trigger me. The situation, there's something that I'm either holding on to that's, that I have an opportunity to take a look at,
Yeah.
deconstruct, examine, decide if I want to hold on to that, all those types of things. But I'll tell you, Manu, when I first started, I could not spend 5 minutes with myself.
Right.
It's
Wow.
like most uncomfortable, sitting there and you're listening. And after I stopped listening to guided meditation, I said, no, I can do this on my own. It was uncomfortable, really uncomfortable, because I thought I was doing it wrong. I was
Right.
taking these thoughts from how, my whole life has been about performance, do it right, do it, well, and all those, types of things. So the idea of mindfulness, meditation practice is really healthy in so many ways.
No, I think so
For
for
sure.
sure. And we had a comment here. Trisha says, it's interesting that you're talking about getting to know your inner self. I've had this conversation with a lot of my friends and the importance of living by yourself and being okay with just being you.
Yeah. Right on, Trisha.
Yeah.
And I would say the times where I've had the biggest epiphanies and like the greatest revelations, they've been alone.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful for it because I realized I didn't need anything outside of me for that
Right.
validation or the direction. I get guidance from people who I trust and hold in high esteem. But at the end of the day, I have an opportunity to trust what's happening here. Right.
Right.
And so, yeah, I really value her, Trisha's comment.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I don't know, like, where do you think this is going to go? Like, I just worry that, something like this shocks us collectively. And then, it's like when you see, police sirens behind you and you're like, oh shit, I'm going to get pulled over. And then it goes by. And then for a minute you're going the limit and then you go back to whatever you were doing. Like I feel like if this becomes one of those like bullshit scenarios, I'm going to be very unhappy with the world right now because I feel like this is like, this is prime example of so many things that we as a society, like I always say, like everyone's not me, like look at what people do, not what they say, right? And I feel like that also applies to society in some ways. And look at what we do and not what we say. When I see society and I see just the struggle we're having on the healthcare side of things when it comes to our own health and disease and everything like that, we're still struggling in our country to figure out if healthcare should be a right or it should be a privilege or it should be accessible or not to everyone and all these different things. But, no one looks at healthcare as something to protect, right? And I feel like if society in a collective, if we interpreted health the way we interpret ourselves as a country and the sovereignty of our country, then wouldn't we act the way we act when we are ready for war, when we're ready for protecting ourselves, right? Do we build tanks after we've declared war, or do we just have a stockpile of them, right? Why don't we treat health that way? That we're ready for these types of things when they happen. You know, there's such a disconnect when it comes to this, and I think that's where, like, you know, the politics of it and everything else come into play. But I don't know. I just hope people really take this in for its absolute value, and before what you call, like sometimes in your videos you refer to it as your programming, right? I really hope people look at this without that programming.
Yeah. Right. And that is my cry as well. What I'm learning more and more is that with those good intentions, that it's important for me to meet people where they are.
Yeah.
Right. And really be with them in the midst of how they're feeling, and not necessarily what they're saying, but what they're expressing, which to me are two different things.
Yeah.
Right. And so they may be saying something that may, you know, sound harsh and or like, you know, but they're expressing something. What is it that they're expressing? Right?
Yeah. Oh, and those can be totally different things. That is powerful. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's I think I got that from you.
Really?
That's why it was either a conversation or something. Or at least the gist of our conversation, that's what I got out of it. I think it was you, actually.
Wow, that's awesome.
And so you're like, that came from you, Monty. The idea of programs, though, I think it's really important to look at. It's and I was explaining to my oldest daughter, Celine, and the idea of, you know, programs. And, you know, to bring that analogy out, you may have seen, but, you know, I had these big Shamu glasses, right? And they're tinted a certain color, and these particular ones were blue. And, you know, I said, no, well, when we're born, many of us have these set of glasses that we're given, right? Yeah. Whether it be culture, your economic, you know, outlook from your family, education, all those types of things, right?
Yep.
And here's where you're handed. And many times what that does is it starts to chip away at the identity that you had when you were born. I mean, I'm a believer that when you're born, that you then begin to unlearn who you really are because of the, you know, unless you have a family that is mindful or is rooted and grounded in love, right? Knows that, you know, and there's health within that family, you know, not just physically, of course, but mentally, spiritually, at all, you know. But I think many of us were born into, you know, societal norms and things that we adopted and adapted because we thought we were supposed to. And then we spend a lifetime almost defending those because it's just what my family did. Yeah. That's exactly, you know. And so times like this give us the permission, right? What if I learned I was wearing these Shamu glasses and I had no idea I had them on? And I said I do. And so when I took them off, I'm saying, oh my gosh, it's not what I thought it was, right? I was wearing these set of sunglasses that were tainted because of tradition and or some theory that I was taught and told, this is how you are, right? Yeah. And so to me, this is a phenomenal opportunity for us. You know, we talked about taking inventory. It's like, why do I believe what I believe? Right. You know, and it's found many times in that times of quiet. Yeah.
And Haley agrees with you. Haley Austin says, I love the concept of unlearning your parental programming. Yeah. No, that's a big one. I mean, we all come from somewhere, you know, I don't like that first step of understanding that where you come, you haven't seen everything, no matter where you're coming from. That first step, I think, is the first step to empathy, which creates this distance between what you're experiencing right now and what you like how bad it could be or how good it could be. Like there's this idea that I've come across, and my background, my family lineage traces to India, and I still have extended family there and stuff. So when I used to visit when I was younger, there are a lot of experiences I had that were very eye-opening to me, and one of them was this concept of that hardship has two different faces. There's an absolute face, and then there's a relative face. And the way I learned about this was seeing poverty in India. I would be finishing up a month visit with my loved ones and family and stuff, and I'd be on my way, about to get on a plane to come home to this great life that I have. And on the way, I would see all sorts of poverty. Kids my own age, at the age of 6, 7, homeless or damn near homeless. And, I came to think that, wow, look, he can only imagine what my life is like walking into this airport, and I can't even fathom what his life is like. And ever since I started seeing things like that, not just in in India, but like here too, it made me realize that until you see there's a separation or there's a difference between your suffering and someone who has it worse than you, you don't, until you see that difference, one thing is for certain, and this is why we have to give people credit for where they are.
Totally.
Physiologically, mentally, emotionally, if you don't know you're any different than someone else, you register suffering in the same intense way as someone who's worse off than you.
Absolutely.
You just do. Like you could have $100 million in the bank, and your brain registers suffering the same way a homeless guy does.
Absolutely.
And to me, that was an eye-opener, because I'm like, okay, as soon as you realize there's a difference between these two things, I think that's the first step towards empathy and awareness of your own scenario and situation.
That's just amazing, because I talk about my girls a lot. They teach me so much. My oldest is 19, and we had a conversation the other day, and she's starting a business venture. She's an entrepreneur. I know she needs to come spend time with you, Monty. But based upon the work that she's doing, she has a heart for justice, and in her own learning and her own understanding, she came up with this. We were talking about privilege, and I said, sometimes that word today rubs people the wrong way, or people embrace it and they really understand what privilege is. And so we said, let's not use that word. Let's come up with, let's see if there's a synonym to that could also speak to that, right?
Sure.
And what emerged was entitlement. And so what we began to do is just jot down some, thoughts and phrases that would bring this to life based upon the, business that she started. And the term entitlement kills empathy. I was like, oh my God, this is so huge.
That is so
because when we can't relate because it doesn't affect us, that kills empathy. We can't feel for them because it's like it's not relatable. So the whole idea of humanity and someone going through something that I think times like this bring that to light as well. I mean, we saw it a lot happening with every ism out there. But especially like this, when this is an opportunity to unite more than anything. So.
No, that's an important one. Like, because privilege kind of triggers people in a funny way lately. I've come to say advantage, and there's an advantage to every aspect of life. I feel like if you're born with a silver spoon and stuff, you have some crazy awesome advantages. But also, if you're born hungry and you've seen the shitty part of humanity, then you also have advantages. If you have the luck, the ability and the willingness to try to make something of that, you know. So it's just a matter of perspective. It's always been a matter of perspective, you know.
Yeah,
And it comes
for sure.
it comes down to that. And I mean, I hope people see that now with this whole stay at home thing, right?
Yeah. So I know some great questions that have emerged out of this
Yeah.
crisis, right? And so,
What's one that's struck you top of mind?
who am I without my routines?
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah.
If you think about it, it's like if I'm taking the same path every day, doing the same
Right.
routine every single day, it doesn't make room a lot of time for the present moment, you know, and the value of that. And
Yeah.
if I identify with all of these things, you know, and um, who am I? And I think that's a big question. I think that is emerging for a lot of people right now because all the things that they identify with are either cut off or they're temporarily like at bay. I just coughed.
Oh no.
I know.
You can't cut this out, Joe. This is live.
Right. You know, it's I think that's one of the most powerful questions I think anyone can ask.
I know, like, yeah, no, who am I is a really good one. And I hope during this time people take a second and ask themselves another one. And that one is, who do you want to become?
Mm.
Because here's everything is a platform, you know. If we give enough meaning and value to what we're experiencing right now, this can be the day one for something you've been wanting to become.
Mm.
You know, and I think we should honor that, and I think we should be mindful of these questions and take them head on, you know. And I think we should reach out, and we should do more things like this, like these videos where we can just kind of explore these ideas. And, you know, like you always struck me as someone like you don't mind thinking around things, or, you know, taking on an idea that contradicts your own thoughts. It's just how we figure things out, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It is the beauty of life, and because from my own experiences, the more that I resist, right, it's in that resistance, right, that I potentially cut off something that was meant for me in the best way,
Mm-hmm.
or it shuts down any form of listening and or learning because I
Mm-hmm.
believe I have all the answers, you know.
Right.
So I think that's important for sure.
Has anyone really approached you? Have you been experiencing anything different during this time? Have people's behaviors changed in any surprising ways that you can think of?
I mean, there's been varied, like I mentioned, perspectives of how people are, you know, viewing what's happening. And I still think because we're still in the early stages of, you know, stay at home,
Yeah.
that I think it's starting to set in. And I think there'll be more emerging, but there's nothing necessarily that is out there, you know, drastic and or I think there's a lot of inquiry happening, which is healthy in my mind,
Mm-hmm.
but nothing drastic.
Yeah. You know, I know it's, for me personally, like it's affected more mentally than anything. Just my family around me, you know, just the toll it's taking, and not more on the isolation part, which is a freaking nightmare when it comes to having kids, like little ones that are going stir crazy as shit and they can't do anything about it. So I'm sure parents can feel that one, but the other one is just, you know, my wife too, and my parents and stuff, just completely being inundated with just nothing but negative headlines, and you know, just, oh, we're not at the end, it'll never be the same, and just the scary thoughts around that, you know. And it just takes a toll, as much as, you know, like, I shouldn't take this to heart right now, no one knows really what's going on, you know, things should settle, but it takes a toll on you mentally, you know. And even if it's not for me as hard, it becomes something that I take on, and it affects me negatively because it's affecting my loved ones, you know. So that's been very difficult for me, I think, overall, managing that, just managing how I can be there for my loved ones, in the way that they need, not in the way that I think I need to be there for them, it's challenging, especially, and on top of that, earning an income and seeing what the hell's going to happen with my own businesses and whatnot, during this time. Like, these are all, like, I don't know, like, first and foremost, I never want to not be available to the ones I love, and that's a shitty thing to feel first, when there's like this pragmatic side of me that's like, well, I got to still try to figure out a way to pay the bills, it's a huge juggle, but I can't complain, I always feel like people are so focused on how much under their means they can live, or how much over their means they've been living. And I don't know, I've been intentionally trying my best to just try to raise the means of everyone around me. I'm not focused. And the more I don't focus on myself in that way, I don't feel like I'm taking away anything from myself. I don't feel like I'm neglecting myself, because it just, I feel better in that state,
Yeah. So I'm going to keep it real here, because ultimately this is an experience that I'm going through, just like everybody else. But before it really started to, heat up in terms of the awareness of what's happening, news outlets and all this, all the gloom, doom and gloom stuff happening.
Yep.
Like 3 days in a row. This is, I want to say 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks ago.
Okay.
I was on the verge of a potential contract with a company that I've been working with here in the Valley, and it was going to be a nice deal.
Oh, nice.
And because of the crisis, they're not entertaining any discretionary spending. So banking on that is like, okay. And then, as with Love Wave Live, which we're going to be a part of, it was the right thing to do, of course, to cancel the event.
Yeah.
And so that happened the next day. And then I had some things lined up financially around, some investments, et cetera, and what's happened to the market.
Yeah.
So it's like, hey, so the idea of just, making a living for all of us, right, it's impacting us.
Yeah.
And so,
it's huge.
Yeah. For me, I allowed myself to feel what was happening. It wasn't pretty, and it was just like, but many times that idea, because I've been still for so long, is really just sitting and then feeling, giving myself permission to feel. Because if I suppress it, it's going to stay in my body. You know how that works.
Yep.
And it'll cause dis-ease. And I've had enough of that in my life. So, but then at that point I said, okay, I get to choose how long I'm in this state.
Yeah.
I get to,
that's it. Like, you just did it. You caught yourself in that moment of it coming in, right?
Well, the week, so actually on the way to that meeting that I just shared with you at a company I was working with, I stopped by, to get gas, and there was this guy out there who was an attendant, and he's like cleaning out everything out there, and he's like whistling and happy. Hi, I mean, just like over the top energy. I was like, this dude is happy, with everything that's happening. And so he comes, towards my car, and I'm like, okay, why are you so happy? And he says, because I choose to be happy.
Yeah.
And I'm like, scold me. Okay, now.
Yeah.
I like that. At the end of the day, it's a choice, right?
It is.
And so,
that's a hard button to push. That's a hard.
It sure is.
It's not even a button. It's a reframing of your freaking brain. Like, we're programmed to be like, okay, here's the journey. Here's the journey to my joy and happiness, right? And the journey is fun, but I can't wait to be happy, and all, everything is at that end goal. But the more I've come to think about it is, by definition, if we're going to spend 90% of our lives in the journey, shouldn't the journey be comfortable? Right? Shouldn't we, shouldn't we have an extra cushion on our seat? Shouldn't we have a nice jacket? Shouldn't we have the nice pants? Right? Like, if 90% of our life is going to be the journey, why isn't the journey important to you in terms of its quality? Right? So like, when I think about it that way, then I'm like, shit, I want to experience life through being happy and joyful. And I feel like if I'm able to be at a state of contentment when I engage in things, then I'm going to be able to give my 100%. Like, because there's only two ways to be really good at something. Whether you got to be stressed the fuck out, right? If you're stressed out, like, physiologically, you'll be so focused on something, you'll get it done, right? But it's not very sustaining. And the other way is, when we do our best work, is when we're in a state of happiness and joy. Like, I'm forgetting who coined the term, but like, when you're in flow, right? Like, I don't know who refers to it in that way, but like, when you're in the flow of things, you perform really well too. And usually when we're on a high of being around family and loved ones and just having a good time, we feel this flow that we're in. A lot of times in social circumstances, but like, if there's a way we could mentally flip that switch and become in flow before we engage in things, I think whatever we're engaging in would kill it. We just completely surpass our own expectations of it. But that challenge is, how do I stay and maintain in that state, right?
So I'm glad you brought that up. So we worked for the same company, right, at one point in time.
Yes, we did. That was my time, just like you did, Joe.
And there was a location in North Scottsdale where meetings were held, and at the basement. I think you know which building I'm speaking of. Yes, right. Yes, the dungeon. And and I remember going down there for a meeting, and they had like posters in the hallways or what have you. And there was this one it was the first time I had saw it, but I know that it's very popular. But the idea, to me, what you just spoke about, is this: how do we maintain it? And so it goes like this, right? Watch your thoughts, they become your words. Watch your words, they become your actions.
Right.
Watch your actions, they become your habits. Watch your habits, becomes your character. Watch your character, that becomes your destiny.
Yeah.
So when we talk about flow, right, and all those things, for me at least, it helps to know that it's going to start with a thought.